Scorpio, there were seasons in your life where everything seemed to slip away one after another, so relentlessly that you stopped keeping count because naming the pain hurt more than bearing it. You watched people walk away without explanation, watched doors close without a warning sign, watched money slip through your fingers, watched dreams you watered with your whole heart wither in soil that never seemed to nourish you back. Maybe you even came to believe that this was just your story, to give more than you receive, to love harder than you're loved, to work deeper than you're recognized. But somewhere underneath the bruises and the exhaustion, your spirit kept whispering, "This can't be the end of the story. This can't be all there is for me." And Scorpio, that whisper was right. Because in ways you cannot yet see, heaven has been quietly gathering every moment of injustice, every hidden tear, every silent surrender, and turning it into a wave of return that is now moving in your direction. What was taken will not come back to you as it left. It will come back blessed, refined, multiplied, wrapped in grace instead of grief. You know what it is to be overlooked. You know what it is to witness someone else take credit for what you built in the dark. You know the pain of watching opportunities you were perfect for slide into someone else's hands, not because they were more deserving, but because they were more visible, more convenient, or better connected. You have felt the sting of smiling and clapping for others while a part of you crumbled inside, asking quietly, "When is it my turn?" You endured seasons when it seemed like everyone else's prayers were answered before yours, like heaven was a busy room where your name was the one not being called. You didn't stop believing entirely, but you did start doubting in secret. Doubting if anything you did really mattered, doubting if your effort would ever be seen, doubting if maybe you were meant to live small to avoid disappointment. What you didn't see, Scorpio, is that nothing you went through disappeared into nothing. In a world obsessed with appearances, there is another ledger being written in a place where no lie can stand, no manipulation can hide, and no act of quiet faith ever goes unnoticed. Every time you chose integrity instead of compromise, something was written there. Every time you loved without keeping score, something was written there. Every time you stayed soft when life tried to harden you, something was written there. Every time you walked away from what wasn't aligned with your soul, even when it cost you dearly, something was written there. And now, that invisible record is not just being read, it's being activated. This is not about punishment for others, it is about restoration for you. You might be tempted to think that getting back what you lost means things will simply return to how they were before everything fell apart. The same people, the same roles, the same doors, just reopened. But that's not what this is. You are not being sent backwards. You have outgrown too much and survived too much to be placed back into the exact conditions that once starved your spirit. When heaven returns something to you, it is never the small, unripe version you cried over. What comes back is the essence of what you longed for, not the specific form that broke you. Love may return, but not in the shape of the person who couldn't hold your heart. Opportunity may return, but not in the room that once made you feel invisible. Money may return, but not through the same draining cycles that once kept you anxious and afraid. What's coming is the healed form of what you were begging to keep in its broken form. There were times you thought you were cursed. How else could you explain the pattern of almost, 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 and then nothing? You would approach breakthroughs, feel the energy rising, sense that finally things were shifting, and then something would collapse at the last second. A plan would fall apart. A promise would evaporate. A person you trusted would pull away or show another face. And each time you said to yourself, maybe I wasn't meant to have this. Maybe this kind of happiness just isn't for me. But deep down, a quieter truth was trying to reach you. Some things didn't stay, not because you were unworthy, but because they were too small for who you are becoming. They were never the final answer, only a shadow of what was possible. Scorpio, you are intense, loyal, and all in by nature. You attach at a soul level. When you love, you see potential, not just reality. You can take scraps of possibility and see palaces. That is your gift, and also why you suffered so deeply when things disappeared. Because you weren't just grieving what was. You were grieving what could have been, if only there had been more honesty, more effort, more reciprocity. You had a vision of what something could grow into if everyone involved was as committed as you. And when they weren't, you tried to give enough for everyone, enough love, enough effort, enough patience, enough faith. It still broke. You thought that meant you failed. But sometimes, Scorpio, the breaking is heaven's way of protecting you from a future where you would have lost even more pieces of yourself. While you were busy trying to keep everything from falling apart, something else was happening behind the scenes. Old cycles were being closed on a spiritual level. Debts you didn't even know existed were being cancelled. Patterns repeated across generations of silence, scarcity, settling, self-abandonment were finally being confronted in you. You were not just fighting your own battles. You were breaking stories that have lived in your bloodline for years. Of course you felt tired. Of course it felt unfair. But what you did during those quiet, hidden years was not for nothing. You were laying down the groundwork for a future where you no longer have to lose everything to learn what you're worth. Now, the energy is different. You may not fully see it yet, but you can feel it in subtle ways. Little alignments, encounters that feel strangely meaningful, invitations that months ago you would have said no to because you didn't believe you belonged in those rooms. But now something in you is curious, willing. A soft inner voice that says, what if this time it doesn't fall apart? What if this time it's safe to open your hands? That's not delusion. That's your spirit beginning to trust again, because it senses a shift in what is being sent your way. You are not attracting from the same place of desperation or emptiness. You are attracting from the place of someone who has walked through fire and discovered they are still here. There's a difference between chasing and receiving, and this new chapter will teach you the beauty of the latter. Before, you hustled emotionally, spiritually, mentally, constantly trying to prove your worth, to convince people to see you, to justify your presence. You negotiated for crumbs of respect, attention, and stability, as if any of those were favors. But now, something in you is done negotiating with what drains you. You are learning to let what is not truly meant for you fall away, even when your heart still aches for it. That surrender is making room for what is actually aligned. For people who don't need 100 chances to treat you right. For spaces that don't ask you to shrink to fit their comfort. For opportunities that feel like expansion, not exhaustion. As what is yours begins to find its way back, it may not announce itself with fanfare. It may come quietly first. A bill paid more easily than before, a message from someone who sees your value without you having to perform. A new path that excites your spirit instead of scaring it into silence. Pay attention to these gentle beginnings. They are like the first raindrops before a storm of blessing. The universe rarely dumps everything on you at once. It gives you signs, small proofs, little confirmations that say, yes, the tide is turning. Keep going, keep receiving. Your job is not to earn these changes through more suffering. Your job now is to stop pushing them away with disbelief. And yes, disbelief will show up. After years of loss, your nervous system has learned to brace for impact. Good news comes and a part of you immediately whispers, "This won't last." Someone kind appears, and a voice inside mutters, "They'll leave too." A door opens and fear insists, "Something will go wrong." Understand that this reaction is not truth. It is trauma. It is the echo of old experiences trying to protect you from being blindsided again. But protection rooted in fear can become a prison. You are being invited to step out of that prison, slowly, gently, refusing to let cynical expectations define a season that was never meant to look like the last one. In this chapter, Scorpio, what returns to you is not just about material gain or visible success. One of the greatest forms of restoration will be internal, the way you feel when you wake up. For a long time, mornings carried weight, like waking up already tired, waking up already sad, waking up already bracing for another day of pretending you were okay. That is changing. You will notice mornings when your first thought is not dread, but possibility. Not, "How will I survive today?" but, "What if something beautiful happens today?" That tiny shift is healing. It is your spirit remembering joy. And as that joy grows, it will attract more reasons to exist. There will be moments when the ones who misused your loyalty, dismissed your potential, or underestimated your resilience will witness the fruits of this return. They might scroll past you, watch quietly, hear your name mentioned in rooms they never expected you to enter. Some may feel regret, some may feel envy, some may pretend not to notice at all. None of that is your concern. Restoration is not a performance for those who could not recognize your value. It is a private love letter from the divine to you, written in the language of breakthroughs, alignment, and unexpected grace. You do not owe anyone an apology for finally walking in what has always been yours. You may also become a mirror for others, simply by living your restoration honestly. The very things you thought disqualified you, the losses, the failures, the collapses, will become the reasons someone else believes they can rise too. They will look at you and think, if Scorpio survived that and still found a way to smile, maybe I can too. Your story, which once felt like a list of wounds, will turn into a map for others. That is another way everything you lost comes back blessed. The pain you endured in isolation becomes a shared source of hope. As these blessings unfold, remember to remain anchored in who you are now, not who you had to be in survival mode. This is not the time to play small out of habit. Be humble, yes, but not invisible. You are allowed to say thank you without immediately downplaying your effort, your talent, your presence. You are allowed to take up space in the life that has been prepared for you. You are allowed to enjoy what comes without constantly scanning for the exit. It will take practice, but every time you choose openness over suspicion, gratitude over fear, calm over chaos, you stretch your capacity to hold more of the good that is flowing in. Scorpio, everything you lost will not return in the exact shapes you remember, but its essence will. The love you gave so freely is coming back as love that holds you too. The resources you poured out without return are coming back as opportunities that nourish you instead of draining you. The time you thought was wasted is coming back as wisdom, discernment, and a spiritual authority that cannot be faked or stolen. Nothing is wasted in the hands of the divine, not your tears, not your waiting, not your wandering. All of it becomes material for blessing when you refuse to let it turn your heart to stone. And as this message reaches its quiet landing place in your spirit, let one more truth sink in. What you are hearing now is not a fixed fortune or a rigid prediction. It is more like a sacred story, a symbolic reflection of what is possible for a Scorpio soul who has walked through fire and still chooses to heal. Think of these words as a mirror held up to a potential path your heart is already leaning toward. If they resonate, if they stir something deep, if they feel like recognition rather than persuasion, keep what speaks to you. Let those parts wrap gently around your faith and encourage you to stay open to restoration. If some parts do not fit your story, allow them to drift past like clouds in a vast sky, noticed but not held. Not every sentence belongs to every listener. What always belongs to you, Scorpio, is your own inner knowing, your quiet partnership with the divine, and the power you carry to turn even your most painful losses into ground where blessings, in their own time and in their own way, finally find their way back to you, this time unmistakably, beautifully, and deeply blessed.